Mocked as an ugly spinster, she returned as the Duke's wife. "Go home, old maid. You're blocking the view of the pretty ones." The words sliced through the ballroom like a blade. Eleanor stood frozen in her dull gray dress, the laughter of Lord Henry and his cronies ringing in her ears. At 28, society had already written her off. The wallflower, the spinster, the invisible woman. She ran out into the rain, humiliation burning hotter than tears on her cheeks. That night, soaked and shivering, she vowed never to return to that glittering, cruel world. 2 years later, she walked back into that same ballroom. But this time, Eleanor wore crimson silk that hugged every curve. Diamonds glittered at her throat. Her head was held impossibly high, and on her arm was the man Lord Henry feared most, Julian, the Duke of Ashland, the wealthiest and most powerful nobleman in England. The room fell silent as she entered. The spinster was gone. In her place stood a duchess. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. Eleanor had perfected the art of invisibility. At 28, she knew exactly where to stand at a ball. Close enough to the wall that she didn't block anyone's view, far enough from the refreshment table that she wouldn't be trampled. She wore gray because it was practical, because it didn't draw attention, because drawing attention had only ever brought her pain. The grand ball at Kensington House was no different from any other. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over silk gowns and tailored coats. Young ladies giggled behind fans while gentlemen appraised them like horses at auction. Eleanor watched from her corner, a book tucked into her reticule for later, when she could finally escape. She didn't mean to move into Lord Henry's path. She'd been edging toward the terrace doors, desperate for air, when he turned sharply from his circle of admirers. He was handsome in the way cruel men often were. Sharp features, calculating eyes, a smile that never reached beyond his lips. "Good God!" he said loudly, stopping mid-stride. "What is this?" Eleanor's breath caught. Several heads turned. "I do beg your pardon, my lord," she said quietly, stepping aside. But Henry wasn't finished. He never was. "No, no, stay there. Let's have a proper look." He circled her slowly, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "Tell me, does your family not own a mirror? Or did you simply decide that gray sackcloth was the height of fashion?" Titters rippled through the crowd. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn. "Lord Henry, please." "Please what?" "Please pretend you belong here." He laughed, a sharp, theatrical sound. "My dear Miss Hartley, you are 28 if you're a day. A confirmed spinster. And yet here you stand, cluttering up a ball meant for young, marriageable ladies." The circle of onlookers had grown. Eleanor could see Lady Pemberton whispering behind her fan, see the Ashford twins covering their mouths to hide their giggles. Even the chaperones looked away, embarrassed on her behalf. "Go home, old maid," Henry said, his voice dripping with mock kindness. "You're blocking the view of the pretty ones." The laughter exploded then, loud, genuine, merciless. It bounced off the gilded walls and pressed against Eleanor's chest until she couldn't breathe. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would wipe that smug expression off Henry's face. But her throat had closed, and her eyes were burning, and if she stayed one more second, she would cry in front of them all. She didn't cry. She ran. Her shoes clicked frantically against marble, then wood, then gravel. She didn't stop until she reached the garden gate, where the rain had started to fall in cold, punishing sheets. Her carefully pinned hair came loose. Her gray dress clung to her skin. Eleanor stood there in the downpour and let it wash over her. The humiliation, the shame, the sick certainty that Henry was right. She was a spinster. She was invisible. She was nothing. But beneath the shame, something else stirred. Something sharp and furious and entirely new. She would never let them make her feel this way again. 3 days later, Eleanor packed her bags. Her mother protested from the doorway of her bedroom, wringing her handkerchief into knots. "You cannot simply leave London in the middle of the season. What will people say?" "They already say I'm a spinster and an embarrassment," Eleanor replied calmly, folding a worn day dress into her trunk. "At least this way I won't have to hear it." "But your prospects, Mama." Eleanor turned to face her mother, and for the first time in her life, she didn't soften her voice or apologize for existing. "I have no prospects. I never did. The sooner we both accept that, the happier we'll be." Her mother's face crumpled, but Eleanor felt nothing but relief. She was done being the tons punching bag. Done wearing gray. Done shrinking herself to fit into a world that would never accept her. The cottage in Somerset belonged to her Aunt Rose, her father's eccentric sister who'd scandalized the family 20 years ago by refusing to marry and moving to the countryside alone. Eleanor had always loved visiting as a child, the wild garden, the cats that lounged in sunny windows, the stacks of books that covered every surface. When she arrived, Aunt Rose took one look at her and said, "Good, you've finally grown a spine. Come inside before you catch your death." The cottage was exactly as Eleanor remembered. Chaotic, colorful, and utterly free of judgment. Aunt Rose didn't ask about balls or suitors or marriage prospects. She asked if Eleanor liked raspberry jam and whether she preferred Byron or Wordsworth. The first morning, Eleanor woke to birdsong instead of her mother's anxious knocking. She dressed in a simple cotton gown. No corset, no stays, just soft fabric that let her breathe. She walked through the garden barefoot, feeling grass and mud between her toes. "You look like a different person already," Aunt Rose observed over breakfast. Eleanor smiled into her tea. "I feel like one." The days blended together in the best possible way. Eleanor helped tend the roses and the vegetables. She read novels in the afternoon sun. She learned to bake bread and milk the neighbor's cow. She wore her hair loose and her dresses simple and her face free of the pinched expression she'd worn for years in London. At night, she sat by the fire with Aunt Rose and talked about things that mattered. Books and ideas and the strange freedom of being invisible to a world that had never wanted to see her anyway. "Do you regret never marrying?" Eleanor asked one evening. Aunt Rose looked up from her knitting, her eyes sharp and knowing. "My dear girl, I've never regretted it for a single moment. Marriage isn't the only path to happiness. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is choose herself." Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. For the first time in her life, she believed it might be possible to be happy without a husband, without society's approval, without anything except her own peace. She decided she didn't need anyone to complete her. She was already whole. The rain came suddenly on a Tuesday afternoon, transforming the country lane into a muddy river. Eleanor had been walking to the village for thread when she heard the horses' distressed whinny cutting through the downpour. She found them just past the curve in the road. A magnificent gray stallion thrashing in the mud, and a man trying desperately to calm him. The man was covered head to toe in muck, his simple linen shirt plastered to his back, his dark hair dripping into his eyes. "Stop pulling on him," Eleanor shouted over the rain, rushing forward. "You're making it worse." The man looked up, startled. His face was striking despite the mud, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that were either gray or blue. She couldn't tell in the dim light. "I beg your pardon?" "The reins," Eleanor said impatiently, already moving to the horse's side. "You're pulling too hard. He thinks he's trapped." She placed her hand on the stallion's neck, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy, boy. Easy now. No one's going to hurt you." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. Gradually, his thrashing slowed. "How did you?" the man began. His foreleg is injured, Eleanor interrupted, running her hands carefully down the horse's leg. Nothing broken, but he's favored it wrong and now the joint's inflamed. He needs rest and a poultice. She looked up at the man, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Well, don't just stand there. Help me get him to shelter. The man blinked. Then, incredibly, he smiled. Yes, ma'am. Together, they coaxed the horse toward a nearby barn. Eleanor kept up a steady stream of instruction. Slower. Give him time. Not so close you're crowding him. And the man obeyed without argument. It was strange, Eleanor thought, to be listened to. In London, men talked over her or through her. This stranger actually seemed to value her opinion. Once the horse was settled in a dry stall, Eleanor found clean rags and began mixing a poultice from the supplies in the barn. The man watched her work with obvious fascination. You're very capable, he said finally. Someone has to be. You certainly weren't managing on your own. Eleanor didn't look up from her work. How did you let him get into such a state? Any stable hand worth his salt would have noticed the swelling days ago. There was a pause. Then, I'm not a stable hand. Oh, Eleanor glanced at him. He looked like one. Rough clothes, calloused hands, mud-streaked face. What are you then? Julian, he said, extending a muddy hand. Just Julian. Eleanor shook it firmly. Eleanor. Just Eleanor. His smile widened. Well, just Eleanor. I believe you've just saved my horse's life. Thank you. Thank me by taking better care of him, she said tartly, but she found herself smiling back. There was something refreshing about this stranger. He didn't leer or condescend. He didn't seem to care that her dress was soaked or her hair was wild. He looked at her like she was a person, not a problem to be solved or a disappointment to be pitted. Will you show me how to apply the poultice? He asked. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Can't you do it yourself? I could, Julian admitted, but I'd rather learn from someone who knows what they're doing. It was the first time in Eleanor's life that a man had admitted she knew more than he did. The first time anyone had asked to learn from her. All right then, she said. Pay attention. They met by accident the next day and the day after that. By the fourth meeting, Eleanor suspected Julian was waiting for her. He'd appear at the river where she liked to read, or along the path where she walked in the mornings. Always with an excuse, checking on a fence, looking for his dog, passing through on his way to somewhere else. Always with that same interested expression, like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. You're not very subtle, Eleanor said one afternoon, not looking up from her book. Julian settled on the grass beside her. I wasn't trying to be. Most people are content to ignore me. You're remarkably persistent. Most people are fools then. Eleanor finally looked at him. He'd cleaned up since their first meeting. No mud this time, just simple country clothes and windswept hair. But his eyes held the same warmth, the same genuine interest. Why? She asked. Why what? Why do you keep seeking me out? I'm not. She hesitated, old insecurities rising. I'm not the sort of woman men usually pursue. Julian tilted his head, studying her. What sort of woman are you then? Plain. Past my prime. Too outspoken. A spinster. I see. He plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. And if I told you that I find your plainness beautiful? That your age makes you interesting rather than obsolete? That your outspokenness is the most refreshing thing I've encountered in years? Eleanor's heart stuttered. I'd say you were mocking me. I'm not. Julian met her eyes, and there was nothing but sincerity in his expression. Eleanor, I have spent years surrounded by people who tell me exactly what they think I want to hear. You scolded me in the mud and ordered me about like a wayward child. Do you have any idea how rare that is? She didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever valued her bossiness before. In London, it had been yet another mark against her. The days blurred together after that. They met every afternoon by the river or in the woods. Julian would bring apples or bread, and Eleanor would bring her books. She'd read poetry aloud, Keats and Shelley and sometimes Shakespeare, while Julian listened with his eyes half closed and a slight smile on his lips. "You have a beautiful voice," he said once. "It's perfectly ordinary." "Nothing about you is ordinary, Eleanor." They talked for hours. He asked about her life, her thoughts, her dreams. Not the polite, surface questions she'd endured at London balls, but real questions. What did she think about the Reform Act? Had she read Mary Shelley's latest novel? What did she want from life? Eleanor found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. About her humiliation at the ball. About her decision to leave London. About her relief at finally being able to breathe. Julian listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to fix her or save her. "You're the bravest person I know," he said one evening as the sun set over the river. "I ran away. You saved yourself. That's not the same thing." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something dangerous unfold in her chest. This man, this supposed stable hand or farmer or whatever he was, saw her. Not the spinster or the wallflower or the disappointment. Just Eleanor. And she was falling in love with him. She suspected, from the way he looked at her, that he was falling too. Terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Here, in this quiet corner of England, she'd found something she'd never expected. Someone who loved her not despite her flaws, but because of her wholeness. Julian arrived at the cottage on a warm Saturday with a picnic basket and an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. Nervous, hopeful, determined all at once. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I need to tell you." They walked to their usual spot by the river, where willows draped over the water and wildflowers dotted the banks. Julian spread a blanket and unpacked the basket with unusual care: cheese, bread, strawberries, wine. "You're being very mysterious," Eleanor observed. "I'm being a coward," Julian corrected. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Eleanor, I haven't been entirely honest with you." Her stomach dropped. Of course. She'd known it was too good to be true. "You're married." "What? No." He looked genuinely horrified. "God, no. Nothing like that." "Then what?" Julian took a deep breath. "I'm not a stable hand. I'm not a farmer. My name is Julian Ashford, and I'm the Duke of Ashland." Eleanor stared at him. Then she laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "That's not funny. I'm not joking." He reached into his coat and pulled out a signet ring, heavy gold with the Ashford crest. "I am the 9th Duke of Ashland. I own half of Derbyshire and a considerable portion of London. I'm one of the wealthiest men in England." The world tilted sideways. Eleanor couldn't breathe. "No. Why would you?" "Because I was tired," Julian said quietly. "Tired of being hunted by every ambitious mother in London. Tired of people who only saw my title and my money. Tired of conversations that never went deeper than the weather and the latest gossip." He moved closer, his eyes intense. "I came to the country to escape all of it. And then I met you. You lied to me. I omitted the truth. There's a difference." "Not much of one." Eleanor stood abruptly, her hands shaking. All the old fears came rushing back. The laughter, the mockery, the certainty that she would never be enough. "Why are you telling me this now?" "To prove that even dukes can toy with spinsters for amusement." "Eleanor, was it entertaining? The plain old maid who didn't recognize a duke covered in mud? Did you laugh about it later?" "Stop." Julian was on his feet, catching her hands in his. "Listen to me. I'm telling you now because I'm falling in love with you, and I need you to know the truth before I ask you to marry me." The world stopped. "What?" Julian dropped to one knee. Right there on the riverbank, with mud on his boots and grass stains on his trousers. Eleanor Hartley, I don't want a society wife who sees me as a prize to be won. I don't want someone who loves my title or my money or my position. I want the woman who scolded me in the mud. The woman who reads poetry with passion and tends horses with gentleness and speaks her mind without fear. His voice cracked slightly. I want you, just you, exactly as you are. Eleanor's vision blurred. Julian, I know I've handled this badly. I know I should have told you sooner. But I was so afraid that once you knew, you'd see me differently. That you'd see the Duke instead of the man. He squeezed her hands. Please tell me I haven't ruined this. Tell me you feel what I feel. She did. God help her, she did. Despite the deception, despite her fears, despite everything. She loved him. Yes, she whispered. Julian's face transformed. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Eleanor pulled him to his feet, laughing through her tears. You ridiculous, secretive, wonderful man. Yes. He kissed her then, right there by the river, and Eleanor felt something she'd never expected to feel. Chosen. Not as a last resort or a compromise, but as a first choice. As the only choice. When they finally broke apart, Julian was grinning. You do realize you're about to become a duchess? Eleanor's smile faded. Oh God, I have to go back to London. Eventually, yes. They'll laugh at me. The Duke of Ashland married to the ugly spinster. Let them laugh, Julian said fiercely. You are going to walk into that ballroom on my arm, and they are going to bow to you, because you are not a spinster anymore, Eleanor. You're a duchess. My duchess. For the first time, Eleanor let herself believe it might be true. The terror didn't hit until they were back in London. Eleanor stood in the bedroom of the Ashford townhouse. Her bedroom now, though she still couldn't quite believe it, and felt her chest tighten. In 3 days, they would attend the opening ball of the season. The same ball where she'd been humiliated 2 years ago. The same ballroom. The same people. I can't do this, she said aloud. Julian appeared in the doorway, still in his shirt sleeves from their earlier meeting with his solicitor. Can't do what? Any of it. The ball. The season. Facing them again. Eleanor pressed her palms against her eyes. They're going to laugh at me, Julian. They're going to say you married me out of pity or madness. They're going to... Stop. Julian crossed the room and pulled her hands away from her face. Listen to me very carefully. You are the Duchess of Ashland now. Do you understand what that means? That I outrank them socially, yes, but... No, not just socially. His voice was firm, almost stern. It means you have power, Eleanor. Real power. The women who laughed at you? They need your approval now. The men who mocked you? They need my favor, which they will not get if they disrespect my wife. He cupped her face. You are not walking into that ballroom as the woman you were. You are walking in as the woman you've become. I don't know how to be a duchess. Yes, you do. You're brilliant and capable and brave. You just need the world to see what I already know. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but 2 years of humiliation didn't disappear overnight. Julian seemed to understand. We'll prepare, he said. Not because you need to change, but because you need armor. And armor, he added with a slight smile, is best when it's beautiful. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. Madame Delacroix, the most sought-after modiste in London, arrived at the townhouse with her entire staff. Eleanor stood on a platform while they measured and pinned and draped. Your Grace has a magnificent figure, Madame Delacroix said approvingly. Those gray dresses you wore before, criminal. Absolute criminal. Eleanor watched in the mirror as they constructed gown after gown. Rich jewel tones that made her skin glow. Cuts that emphasized her curves rather than hiding them. Fabrics that whispered wealth and power. But it was the crimson silk that made her breath catch. This one, Julian said from his chair in the corner. Definitely this one. The gown was scandalous. Lower cut than anything Eleanor had ever worn. Fitted through the bodice and hips before falling in elegant folds to the floor. The color was bold, defiant, impossible to ignore. Look. Eleanor trailed off, staring at her reflection. Like a queen, Julian finished. That night, he led her to the family vault and presented her with the Ashford jewels. Emeralds and sapphires and rubies that had adorned duchesses for generations. He selected a diamond necklace that made her throat look long and elegant. "These are yours now," he said, fastening it around her neck. "Everything I have is yours." Eleanor met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm still frightened." "Good. It means you understand what you're about to do." He kissed her temple. "But Eleanor? They should be more frightened of you." On the morning of the ball, Eleanor woke with determination settling in her bones. She wasn't the woman who'd fled in tears 2 years ago. That woman had been defeated and hopeless. This woman had survived. This woman had chosen herself. This woman had found love on her own terms. As her maid dressed her hair and laced her into the crimson gown, Eleanor practiced her duchess face in the mirror. Cool, confident, untouchable. "How do I look?" she asked Julian when she was finally ready. He stared at her for a long moment. "Like revenge," he said finally. "Beautiful, elegant revenge." Eleanor smiled. "Perfect." The carriage rolled to a stop in front of Kensington House, and Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading and craving in equal measure. "Ready?" Julian asked, offering his arm. Eleanor took a deep breath and placed her hand on his sleeve. "Ready." The footman opened the carriage door. Eleanor stepped down in a whisper of crimson silk, and even in the dim light of the torches, she could see heads turning. Curious glances. Whispered questions. They climbed the steps slowly. Deliberately, Julian kept his hand over hers, a constant reminder. "You are not alone. You are not powerless. You are mine and I am yours." The entrance hall was exactly as Eleanor remembered. Gilded and gleaming and full of London's elite in their finest clothes. But this time, instead of slinking along the walls, she walked straight down the center. The butler announced them in a carrying voice. His Grace, the Duke of Ashland, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashland. The ballroom doors swung open. For a moment, there was nothing but sound and light and movement. Then, slowly, the conversations faltered. The music continued, but heads turned. Eyes widened. Whispers began to spread like ripples across water. Eleanor walked into the ballroom on Julian's arm, and the room fell silent. She could feel every gaze on her, assessing, judging, trying to understand. The Duke of Ashland had been absent from society for 2 years. Everyone had speculated about who he would eventually marry. An heiress, a beauty, someone worthy of his title and fortune. Not her, never her. But here she was, diamonds glittering at her throat, crimson silk flowing around her like liquid fire. Head high, back straight, every inch a duchess. Lady Pemberton stood near the refreshment table, her fan frozen halfway to her face. The Ashford twins, those giggling girls who'd laughed at Eleanor's humiliation, stared with their mouths actually open. Even the matrons who'd turned away in embarrassment now craned their necks to see. Eleanor recognized them all. Every single person who'd watched her run from this room in tears. And none of them recognized her. "Who is she?" Eleanor heard someone whisper. "I've never seen her before." The new Duchess. Where did she come from? Eleanor's lips curved into a small, private smile. They couldn't reconcile the confident woman in crimson with the wallflower in gray. In their minds, she simply didn't exist anymore. She'd been erased and replaced. Good. Julian leaned close to murmur in her ear. "You're magnificent." "I'm terrified." "Same thing in my experience." He guided her further into the room, and the crowd parted before them like water. "Shall we make them wait to approach us? Or should we be gracious?" "Make them wait," Eleanor said immediately. Julian's laugh was low and warm. "Vicious. I love it. They took their position near the center of the ballroom, the position reserved for the highest-ranking guests. Within moments, they were surrounded by people eager to curry favor with the Duke and meet his mysterious new wife. "Your Grace, you must tell us how you met. Your Grace, that gown is absolutely stunning. Your Grace, will you be hosting a ball this season?" Eleanor answered with the cool politeness Julian had taught her. Friendly enough to be proper, distant enough to maintain power. She watched their faces carefully, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to remember. No one did. She'd been that invisible. But then, across the ballroom, she saw him. Lord Henry, leaning against a pillar with a glass of champagne, surveying the room with his usual air of smug superiority. He was staring at her with open appreciation, the way he'd stared at all the pretty young girls 2 years ago, the way he'd never looked at her. Eleanor felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. This was why she'd come. Not for the others, but for him. The man who'd made her flee in tears. The man who'd called her ugly and old and worthless. Julian must have felt her tense, because his hand tightened on hers. "That's him, isn't it?" "Yes. Say the word, and I'll have him thrown out." Eleanor looked up at her husband, this powerful, protective man who would defend her without question. But this wasn't his fight. It was hers. "No," she said quietly. "Let him come." And come he would. Men like Henry always did, drawn to wealth and beauty and power like moths to flame. She just had to wait. Eleanor didn't have to wait long. Lord Henry pushed away from his pillar and crossed the ballroom with the confident stride of a man who'd never been refused anything in his life. His eyes were fixed on Eleanor, or rather on the beautiful, wealthy Duchess he saw, not the woman beneath. Julian tensed beside her, but Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Trust me." "Your Grace," Henry said, bowing deeply. When he straightened, his smile was all practiced charm. "What an absolute vision you are this evening. London has been quite dull without the Ashlands in attendance." "Has it?" Eleanor kept her voice cool and polite. "Unbearably so." Henry's gaze raked over her appreciatively, lingering on the diamonds at her throat. "I must confess, I'm devastated to discover you're already married. Had I known such a beauty was available, I would have pursued you myself." Julian made a sound that might have been a growl. Eleanor pressed her heel into his foot in warning. "How flattering, Lord Henry," she said. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I am Lord Henry Thornton at your service." He extended his hand, clearly expecting her to offer hers for him to kiss. Eleanor didn't move. "Oh, we've met before, my lord." Henry blinked, his smile faltering slightly. "Have we? I'm usually quite good with faces, and I assure you, I would remember meeting someone as striking as yourself." "Would you?" Eleanor tilted her head, studying him. 2 years ago, this man had made her feel worthless. Now he was practically salivating over her wealth and position. The hypocrisy was almost amusing. "Perhaps you only remember the faces you deem worthy of remembering." Something flickered across Henry's expression. Confusion, and the first hint of unease. "I'm not sure I follow, Your Grace." "No," Eleanor said softly. "I don't suppose you do." She let the moment stretch, watching him squirm. Then, 2 years ago, Lord Henry. The grand ball. Right here in this very ballroom. Henry went very still. His eyes searched her face, looking for something familiar. She could see the moment the pieces started to fall into place, the careful, dawning horror. "You told me to go home," Eleanor continued, her voice steady and clear. "You said I was an old maid, that I was blocking the view of the pretty ones." She took a step closer, and Henry actually backed up. "Do you remember now, Lord Henry?" His face had gone pale beneath his tan. "Miss Hartley, Duchess Ashland, actually." Eleanor smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "But yes, I'm the woman you publicly humiliated, the woman you laughed at, The woman you deemed so worthless that you couldn't even be bothered to remember her face. The color drained completely from Henry's face. Around them, the conversations had stopped again. People were listening, watching. This was about to become gossip for weeks. Your Grace, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Because I wasn't worth knowing. Was I? I was just a spinster in a gray dress. Easy to mock. Easy to forget. Eleanor's voice hardened. But I'm not easy to ignore anymore, am I? Please, if I had known you would become. Would become what? Rich? Beautiful? Powerful? Eleanor laughed. A sharp sound. So you're not sorry for what you said. You're only sorry that I turned out to be someone important. Henry opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked desperately around, perhaps hoping someone would come to his rescue. But the other guests had stepped back, creating a circle of empty space around them. No one wanted to be associated with a man who'd just been publicly called out by a duchess. You were cruel to me when I had no power, Eleanor said quietly. Not because I deserved it, but because you could be. Because no one would stop you. Because hurting people weaker than yourself made you feel strong. She held his gaze unflinching. But I'm not weak anymore. And you, Lord Henry, are exactly as small as you always were. Your Grace, please. May I have this dance, Your Grace? Julian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He'd stepped forward, his expression cold and dangerous as he looked at Henry. Or is this man bothering you? Eleanor had never loved him more than in that moment. He'd given her space to fight her own battle, but he was ready to step in the instant she needed him. He's not bothering me, Eleanor said, taking Julian's offered arm. He's not important enough to bother me. She turned away from Henry without another word, letting Julian lead her onto the dance floor. Behind them, she could hear the whispers exploding. Shocked, delighted, vicious. By tomorrow, everyone in London would know that Lord Henry Thornton had once mocked the now Duchess of Ashland, and that the Duke himself had cut him dead in revenge. Henry's social standing wouldn't recover. Not from this. Are you all right? Julian asked as they began to waltz. Eleanor looked up at him and realized she was smiling. Really smiling, for the first time all evening. I'm perfect. You were incredible. Absolutely incredible. I was terrified. Didn't show. Julian spun her gracefully, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of Lord Henry standing alone at the edge of the ballroom, his face ashen. He'll never recover from this, you know? I know. Do you feel better? Eleanor considered the question. She'd imagined this moment for 2 years. The confrontation, the revenge, the satisfaction of watching Henry realize what he'd lost. But now that it had happened, she felt something unexpected. I feel free, she said finally. Like I've finally closed a door that's been hanging open for too long. Julian pulled her closer. Good, because you deserve to move forward, not look back. They danced in silence for a moment, the music swelling around them. Eleanor could still feel the eyes on her. Curious, admiring, wary. But for the first time, she didn't care what they thought. Their opinions didn't define her anymore. Julian? She said softly. Yes. Thank you. For letting me handle that myself. His smile was warm and proud. You didn't need me. You never did. But I'm honored to stand beside you anyway. The rest of the ball passed in a blur of introductions and carefully worded conversations. Every important family in London wanted to meet the new Duchess of Ashland, to secure her favor, to erase any previous slights or oversights. Lady Pemberton approached with a strained smile. Your Grace, what a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Eleanor smiled blandly. Indeed, Lady Pemberton, though we have met before. Have we? The older woman's face went tight. 2 years ago, you were whispering behind your fan while Lord Henry mocked me. I remember the feather in your hair. It was purple. Lady Pemberton's mouth opened and closed soundlessly before she retreated with a mumbled excuse. The Ashford twins tried to befriend her, gushing about her gown and her jewels. Eleanor was polite but distant. She didn't need friends who only valued her now that she had power. Throughout it all, Julian remained at her side, a steady, protective presence. He deflected the more aggressive social climbers and smoothly extracted them from tedious conversations. But he also stepped back when Eleanor wanted to handle something herself, trusting her judgment completely. Around midnight, Eleanor found herself standing near the terrace doors, looking out at the garden where she'd fled in tears 2 years ago. The rain had stopped, and moonlight silvered the roses. "Regrets?" Julian asked, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "No." Eleanor took the glass and sipped. "I was just thinking about the woman I was that night, how broken she felt, how certain she was that she'd never be happy. And now," Eleanor turned to look at the ballroom behind them. The glittering crowd, the music, the luxury. It was the same world that had rejected her, but she saw it differently now. Not as something she needed to conquer or win approval from, but simply as noise. Background noise to her real life. "Now," she said slowly, "I realize I was already becoming the person I needed to be. I just didn't know it yet." She met Julian's eyes. "Leaving London didn't make me weak. It made me strong enough to come back on my own terms." "And Lord Henry?" Eleanor glanced across the room. Henry had retreated to a far corner, nursing a drink and studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone. His friends had abandoned him. His social circle had evaporated. By confronting him publicly, Eleanor had done more than get revenge. She'd revealed him for what he truly was: petty, cruel, unworthy of the power he'd wielded. "He doesn't matter anymore," Eleanor said truthfully. "He probably never did. I just needed to believe it." Julian set down his glass and took both of her hands. "Dance with me again? We've already danced twice. People will talk. Let them." He pulled her back onto the dance floor, and Eleanor went willingly. As they waltzed, Eleanor became aware of the other couples making space for them, the way conversations paused as they passed. The Duke and Duchess of Ashland, clearly besotted with each other. A love match, not a political alliance. It was almost scandalous. Eleanor didn't care. "Do you know what I realized tonight?" Julian murmured against her ear. "What?" "That I'm the luckiest man in this room. Not because I married a duchess or a beauty or someone society deems appropriate." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes soft. "But because I married the only woman brave enough to scold me in the mud. The only woman who saw me as just Julian." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I saw you because you let me see you. You could have told me who you were that first day. And you would have treated me differently. Maybe. Probably." Eleanor smiled. "But I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad I fell in love with the man before I knew about the Duke. And now that you know?" "Now," Eleanor said, rising up on her toes to kiss him softly, "I love them both." The music swelled to its final crescendo, and Julian spun her one last time. As he pulled her close again, Eleanor caught sight of their reflection in one of the gilded mirrors lining the ballroom. A woman in crimson silk, diamonds blazing at her throat, wrapped in the arms of one of the most powerful men in England. She barely recognized herself. But unlike 2 years ago, when she'd been invisible in gray, this transformation came from within. The dress and jewels were just armor. The real change was in her spine, her shoulders, her eyes. She'd learned to value herself, and that made all the difference. The song ended. The room erupted in applause, for the music, for the Duke, for the season's most talked about couple. Eleanor stepped out of Julian's arms and surveyed the ballroom one final time. Lady Pemberton trying to catch her eye. The Ashford twins whispering enviously. Lord Henry slinking toward the exit. All these people who'd dismissed her, rejected her, laughed at her. She felt nothing but indifference. "Shall we go home?" Julian asked, offering his arm. Home. The Ashford townhouse with its comfortable library and warm fires and rooms where she could be just Eleanor, not the Duchess. Home with the man who loved her for herself. Home where she was wanted and valued and safe. "Yes," Eleanor said, taking his arm. "Let's go home." They walked through the ballroom together, heads high, and the crowd parted before them. Bows and curtsies followed in their wake. The Duke and Duchess of Ashland, leaving the ball early because they pleased, answerable to no one. As they descended the steps to their waiting carriage, Eleanor felt the weight of the evening lift from her shoulders. She'd faced her demons and won. She'd proven to herself, not to them but to herself, that she was worthy, that she'd always been worthy. The ballroom doors closed behind them, muffling the music and chatter. Julian helped her into the carriage and settled beside her, immediately pulling her close. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We both were." As the carriage rolled away from Kensington House, Eleanor looked back one last time at the glowing windows and the shadows of dancers inside. That world had once meant everything to her. Its approval had been the only thing she'd wanted. Now it meant nothing at all. She turned away from the window and nestled against Julian's shoulder, his arms solid and warm around her. This was what mattered. Not revenge or social standing or proving something to people who'd never deserved her time. Just this. Just love. Just peace. The world had called her invisible, but to the Duke, she was the only one in the room. And in the end, that was the only opinion that mattered, not his but her own. She'd learned to see herself clearly, to value herself honestly, to choose herself bravely. Everything else was just noise. "I love you," Eleanor whispered into the darkness of the carriage. Julian's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, my Duchess, my Eleanor." And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Hartley, now Eleanor Ashford, Duchess of Ashland, felt completely, perfectly, triumphantly happy. The end. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.